by the way, that's where MSPs have always wanted to be. That is where MSPs have always positioned themselves and described themselves as being the quote unquote trusted advisor. You don't become a trusted advisor and then stop midway through the organization. If you're trusted, you're going to continue to go up that chain of command until you get to the very, very top. And that's where MSPs are today. You certainly see it with compliance, VCIO, types of services that MSPs are now rapidly evolving into. So this is just a way to describe the modern day expectation and the modern day opportunity for MSPs that they're seeing. That, again, this gentleman that I spoke with said, it's a really different path for an MSP today than it would have been 5 years ago when he was practicing. And I don't disagree with that. Is it too late to start an MSP practice? It's an interesting question, but it's an important one that we all have to ask. And I'll tell you why I'm asking the question. I recently spoke with a MSP business owner, former MSP business owner. He sold his practice several years ago. He doesn't know if he would start an MSP practice today because there are so many new requirements of MSPs in today's environment. And I get why he said that. And part of it could be just the time lapsed since when he left his MSP practice to today, right? May feel like there's a certain amount of evolution that has taken place, which is understandable. But I think we have to ask the question, is it too late to start an MSP practice, for two reasons. Number one, this is an industry of entrepreneurs. There are always new MSP businesses being started all across the planet. It has never ceased to amaze me how many innovative entrepreneurial minds are at work specifically in this industry. And it's been a source of the strength of managed service providers since the very beginning, is that there are people out there who are doing very difficult work and coming up with new and innovative ways to do it and make money at it and make good money at it. And so you always have a constant supply of new MSP business owners because, you work in an MSP, you're an employee, the MSP goes out of business, maybe it sells to a larger MSP, people leave, they start up a new MSP practice. It has been happening like that for decades, and it's probably going to continue to happen. So you always have a steady supply of new business owners, new MSP business owners coming into the profession. And so they are probably always asking themselves, hey, am I too late? Has it passed me by? Should I be doing something else? So it's relevant for that scenario. There's another scenario that is equally as relevant, and that is an existing business. And I'll give you a handful, right? Value-added resellers, system integrators, office, copier, printer, fax, machine, kind of a, big legacy business machine companies that are making, again, all across the globe, making very steady inroads into managed services for obvious reasons. You have data hosting companies, you have application development companies, you have cybersecurity companies. There are so many different types of companies that don't do managed services as a core or dominant business, meaning the majority of their revenue comes from something else, but they have an existing small managed services practice that they want to grow. And so they are always asking themselves, they're probably not saying, is it too late? They're probably saying, look, how do I become bigger? How do I become better? But it's asking really the same core question of what is expected of me as a managed services company? And am I ready to meet that challenge? Am I ready to do what is necessary? And so if you are in any one of those scenarios, and this would include if you're an MSP that maybe just started up in the last 5 years, this is going to be for you. This is a good question to ask yourself, and it's a good exercise in what is the answer. And so we're going to do that today. We're going to go through the question. We're going to outline what a good response is and what the requirements and obligations and expectations are for a modern day MSP, and help you in some small way to answer that question yourself. So why don't we start with an historical review of managed services and where that evolution started, because that is a really interesting question that is practical, relevant, and useful for today's MSP in answering the question, am I too late? What is expected of me? So you get the drill. The early stage MSPs who evolved almost not exclusively, but because there were certainly some startup MSPs that began as MSPs, even in the late 90s. But they were largely, again, enterprise focused. They did many other things, not just managed services, like even pure play managed services back then was extraordinarily rare. Almost all the MSPs back in the mid 90s and onward did something else. They sold product. They had system integration or professional services. They might have had hosting. They might have done application development. They might have had other businesses lines that were adjacent to managed services, but pure play managed services companies were kind of rare. The evolution and what started managed services to begin with was a desperate need to leave behind legacy business models that were failing. That is one of the biggest motivators for why MSPs began to emerge from the mid 1990s through the early 2000s, and what kicked off the massive small and medium-sized MSP revolution beginning in the early 2000s was this desire to be relevant to a slowly at first change in customer demand. Customers were beginning to want something else, but this was also not just customer demand, this was also provider inefficiencies in the IT channel that were being worked out and addressed. And that's the best way I can think of describing it, is that there were just inefficiencies in the way services and products were being delivered that the market, the IT channel, could no longer tolerate. And their way of addressing it was get into managed services. And I don't want to get into because it's a big issue, of what the IT channel looked like, and the politics and the financial pressures that also go with the politics of how business was done back then. Is it really any different today? Not really. But the dynamics were such that, the vendors who made products, hardware, some software, but mostly hardware, dominated the politics and the economics, and therefore the business model of how the channel operated in order to get those products out to the consumer market. It shouldn't be surprising to anybody that when you had really a revolution of the IT channel saying to the big vendors, you know what, we're not happy with our lot in life. We're kind of sick of this. The margins aren't that great. You're starting to compete with us, meaning you, the vendors, are starting to compete with us. And life is not that great. As a reseller, we're going to seek out something better, and managed services is what they found. And so we all know this. That's kind of how the managed services profession kicked off. It's what ignited the spark behind managed services, and it soon started to heavily influence customer demand, because that's what also customers eventually wanted from their providers. They wanted, not this reactive, chaotic break fix type of relationship. They wanted something that was more proactive, managed services. And so you had this massive transition that for the most part, it's done. The transition from break fix to proactive managed services has, at least as far as I'm concerned, it's evolved and it is finished. The cycle has completed itself. Now, what you have is a enforcement issue of whether or not companies that start today as a managed service provider, are following those best practices, and whether or not they are figuring out that there is a path towards managed services productivity, efficiency, profitability, security, and whether or not and how long it takes for that company to find out what that is. And I'll give you a great analogy, right? I was thinking about this and how to explain this. If you wanted to be a physician, a doctor, a medical doctor today, and you wanted to do this very, very badly, like that, you were sure that that's what you wanted to do. You wanted to help people. You wanted to be in the business of making people who are sick healthy. And you said, I'm going to be a doctor, but I'm not going to go to undergraduate school, and I'm not going to go to medical school. I'm going to figure it out on my own. If someone said that, you would say, you're crazy. That's not the way you do it. You have to go at least to medical school. You have to have some training from people who are properly trained physicians themselves. Otherwise, you're just going to take a very long path towards proficiency and expertise. And I thought that that was a good analogy for what we see a lot of today, which is the modern day expectations of MSPs. And this gets to the person that I was speaking with recently and why they made their comment, which is he said the modern day expectations for MSPs is very different than it was even 5 years ago. And I agree with him. I think that that was a perfectly acceptable and rational statement to make. There's cybersecurity requirements, not just self-imposed from the industry, but they're being imposed externally onto the industry by legislative laws that are coming out. There are public policy, there's just general peer pressure, there are legal, there's insurance, there's a whole host of different areas and origination of pressure to become better in cybersecurity. So when you have that, when you have data privacy, data protection expectations, when you have risk management responsibilities, not just for your own MSP business, but for your customers, all your customers are coming to you saying, you're my MSP. Could you help me become more risk averse? What can you do as an MSP to help me solve this, not a technical problem, but at its core, a fundamental business problem? Those are really big issues. They're not insignificant, and they directly involve an MSP and its relationship with a customer. And you could see how even in 5 years, that is a very, very significant evolutionary shift from where managed service providers used to be 5, even 10 years ago, where I would say the dominant relationship back then was on a technical level. And it didn't mean the technical relationship wasn't impacting a larger business or financial outcome. It certainly did. What I'm saying is, and what this gentleman that I was speaking with was inferring, is that the modern day relationship between MSP and customer has transcended just the technical and has now manifested itself into the corporate executive C-suite. By the way, that's where MSPs have always wanted to be. That is where MSPs have always positioned themselves and described themselves as being the quote unquote trusted advisor. You don't become a trusted advisor and then stop midway through the organization. If you're trusted, you're going to continue to go up that chain of command until you get to the very, very top. And that's where MSPs are today. You certainly see it with compliance, VCIO, types of services that MSPs are now rapidly evolving into. So this is just a way to describe the modern day expectation and the modern day opportunity for MSPs that they're seeing. That, again, this gentleman that I spoke with said, it's a really different path for an MSP today than it would have been 5 years ago when he was practicing. And I don't disagree with that. But let's get back to the expectation for that newer MSP, the MSP that has started up in the last several years, the MSP business unit inside a much larger organization that has aspirations to grow and to do a lot more and be more relevant with that organization and those customers that they support. What is their path? Their path is not, going back to the physician scenario and analogy, their path is not to figure this out on their own and make things up as they go along. That is the path towards ruin, just bad outcomes all along. It's not going to be the secure route. It's not going to be efficient. It's not going to be scalable. It's not going to be profitable. It's going to be a lot of trial and error. And the trial and error that you go through in that journey right now, you don't have the luxury of time to do that, right? Getting back to the analogy of the physician, right? There is no in the modern day world for someone who wants to be in the medical profession, to be a physician, to figure out on their own what is a best practice for performing physician services, right? I use this analogy a lot because I think it's a good one. We have no place in the modern day physician to figure out why or whether they should wash their hands before they go into surgery or before they go into to see a patient. A trained physician already knows this and they already do it. It's just part of their routine. It's part of their best practice. They don't need to be told that because they have already been told that. You don't want an MSP that is trying to figure out, should I wash my hands before I go into surgery? Or do you want an MSP that says, I already know what my expectations are. I'm going to do this. I don't need to be told. I already know how to follow best practices. That is the critical difference between those MSPs who are going to succeed and those MSPs who are going to fail. It's a lot to take in, especially if you're trying to figure out day to day, you're trying to make money, you're trying to survive, you're trying to grow your business, you're trying to keep your customers happy, you're trying to keep your staff happy, you're trying to build something valuable. It's a lot. But it's not a lot if you already have a template. And we do have a template. We have a best practices framework. We have a best practice guide that has been followed by thousands of MSPs before you that allows you to follow that path and still be innovative, still be unique, still be who you are, but not be making this stuff up as you go along, trying to figure out, how do I become scalable? How do I become more secure? How do I become more of a good MSP, an excellent MSP? That is going to be what separates the winners from everybody else. And that really is core to the answer to the question, is it too late to become an MSP? It's not too late to be an MSP today, because as I frequently say, and I continue to say it because it continues to be true, there's more demand for qualified MSPs than there are qualified MSPs available to do the work. There are a lot of companies who claim to be MSPs who are not competent to do the work that their customers want them to do, or they're not competent to deliver the managed services that customers out there that they may have not yet met want from that provider. And if you're asking, why do I keep saying that? Well, the answer to that is the sheer number of customers who have tried multiple, like half a dozen or more MSP relationships, right? That wouldn't happen if they had found a qualified managed service provider, because I've seen qualified managed service providers and the relationships that they have with their customers transcend many, many years for the most part. This is not like just switching from one telephone service to another where it's largely a commodity. But I think that that's what a lot of customers have found, is commodity-driven companies that claim to be an MSP, but really what they're doing is they're taking shortcuts. They're not delivering managed services in the true proactive sense of the word. They're doing something else, and it shows. It shows in both the customer satisfaction or dissatisfaction. It shows up in profitability or lack thereof. It shows up in the lack of ability to scale, to be efficient in your movement. Those things are huge, obvious signs of something being wrong in your quote unquote MSP practice. So if you were to find a book, a guide, a path that would allow you to stop scratching your head and figuring out, how do I do this? How do I do this properly? How do I do this so that I can become profitable? How do I do this so that I can become more secure? How do I do this so that my customers will like this service to the point where they don't want me to leave? They don't want me to go away because I am too valuable to them. That is achievable even today for a brand new startup, but it's only achievable to that type of a startup if you acknowledge that you don't have the luxury or the time to sit around and make up a whole new set of rules for yourself. They already exist. All you need to do is follow them, right? There isn't some big mystery about how to become a good MSP. We all know it. The question is, are you doing it? Like there are so many companies that we see who are well-intentioned, want to do the right thing for their customers, and yet consistently don't perform very well because they're not following the best practice. And it's not a huge gap that they have to fix. It's relatively small. It's just a question of, do they accept it? Do they open themselves up to the idea that if we just make this little modification, things are going to lock into place and it's going to look like a very different business than it used to? There are other issues such as people saying, oh my gosh, private equity is getting into managed services. Is it too late? Are they buying up all the good MSPs? Absolutely not. Again, regardless of what the private equity community is doing in managed services, and I think that a lot of it is really good because it's giving that first generation of MSP business owners that ability to exit, to go off and enjoy retirement, do something else with a new career, what have you. I think it's served a very good purpose. But in no way does it mean that there is a loss of the market. The market continues to expand far beyond what the private equity community is buying up in terms of MSP assets. There are new customers being born every single day, new managed services customers, I mean. And that gets back to the question. If you're a new MSP, if you are thinking about getting into managed services, maybe your MSP business that you worked for, they got bought by another MSP, maybe they got bought by a private equity company and you don't like that. And so you want to go off and do your own thing. You're asking yourself, should I do this or is there something else I should do? You can be successful in managed services. And here's the clincher. You can go from day one to a very short period of time with relatively little money. You can be a very high functioning, secure, scalable managed service provider if you know what you're doing and if you follow the best practices. Put differently, even if you don't know what you're doing, if you follow the rules, if you follow the managed services best practice community, if you follow the framework that has been around for 20 plus years, you will have a path that eliminates so much of the guesswork out of being a good MSP. That all you need to do is put these things in place and let the rest happen. There's plenty of work left to be done, right? In terms of how you message yourself, how you communicate, how you develop relationships with customers, how you find customers, right? Those are challenging things to begin with, right? Don't complicate it by also making it really complicated more than it needs to be on how you run and deliver your services. These are the things that are baked into our community's best practice. These are baked into our controls, the control frameworks that guide managed services. All you need to do is pay attention, put them into practice, and let the magic happen. That's my advice. If you are a startup MSP recently or thinking about starting up, if you are an existing MSP business unit inside a larger organization, stop making things up. Just follow the path. Follow the path. It's already been proven. It works. And that will take you where you need to be and allow you to be effective as a managed service provider, risk averse, profitable, scalable, and a good partner for your customers. So the answer to the question is no, it is not too late to be an MSP. It's too late to be a bad MSP. It's too late to be an MSP that is going to make this up as you go along. That business era has gone. We don't have that anymore. If you're an MSSP struggling out there, this is really for you, right? You have great value. Don't waste it by thinking that you're going to make this stuff as you go along. You don't have the luxury for that, and your customers don't have the luxury. There's not enough time. You need to follow the path. Become a competent, modern-day, compliant MSP or MSSP. That's what your customers expect. That's what the world at large expects of you. And you will thank yourself for it. Your employees will thank yourself for it. Your customers will thank you for that. It's not too late to be a managed service provider. Just be a good one. That's all we ask. Until next time.